particularly to it's a great joy too to have Tom Speed with us from MHCLG. He's going to be sharing with us some of the vision for the Pride in Place programme and looking at the particular ways in which churches, church leadership can be involved in terms of the oversight of the Pride in Place programme. Be really great, friends, if you could, using the chat function in the first instance, we'll come on to question and answers in just a moment. But if you could just introduce yourselves in the chat, that would be wonderful. It'd be really good just to see the geographical spread that we've got and how people relate to this particular piece of work. I'm conscious there are members here of the Together Network. There are also a clergy and those who are church leaders overseeing and helping to shape the communities which operate within the Pride of Place neighbourhoods. A warm welcome to each and every one of you as we gather here for this very important event. Friends, I'd like to offer a prayer for our time together in just a few moments' time, and then we'll be able to introduce Tom more formally to then be able to sort of shape the event for the course of this time together. We will be here for up to an hour. It won't go beyond the hour because I know that people have got very busy diaries. So with these things in mind, my friends, let us pray. Father, we thank you for the great privilege of being immersed in the neighbourhoods that you love and that you shape. Father, in the course of this conversation, in the course of these moments, help us to listen deeply to your Spirit. Help us in this epiphany tide to be attentive to where your revelation, your revealing is taking place and where you are at work in the midst of our communities. Help us, Lord, to be that political body as the mighty prayer for the world that is the church, to be able to listen and join in with you and your desires for the communities and help us to shape communities and places where you are celebrated and indeed which you shape. Help us to create those communities as you intend them to be. So, Lord, as we come to this moment together, help us have those communities upon our shoulders as we seek to represent, as we seek to lead, as we seek to bring hope, as we seek to bring joy in the midst of the neighbourhoods that we serve. This we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. So, friends, once again, a very warm welcome to everyone. If you have questions moving on, as Tom gives us his presentation about Pride in Place, if you have particular questions that arise, if we can invite you, please, to use the chat function. And between us, Polly from Church Urban Fund and myself, we'll keep an eye on the questions. And then a bit later on this afternoon, there'll be a moment for us to shape those questions and put them to Tom, just to help us in our thinking. And a little bit later on in this webinar, we will have an opportunity to share something other further ways in which Church Urban Fund is able to support you and encourage you in the really important ministries that you offer. So, my friends, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Tom for his presentation. Tom, welcome. Tom representing MHCLG from His Majesty's Government.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Huge pleasure to be here with everyone. It's great to see so many of you sort of actively engaging in the programme. Yes, I do have some slides, so I'll get to those in a second, but I'll start with sort of explaining who I am and why I've sort of got involved in this bit of the work. So, as Rob says, my name's Tom. I work for MHCLG, and I sit in the team that is delivering the Pride in Place programme. The way the team's structured is we all have a geographic remit. So I cover primarily Yorkshire and the Humber and bits of the northeast of England. So if there's any of you from those places, then that's great. My knowledge of those will be a little bit better than the rest of the country, but I do have a bit of knowledge about the rest of them. That's sort of professionally where I sit, but personally, I've been a sort of church attendee for my whole life. I grew up in Croydon. So I don't know if anyone from Croydon is on the line. I know we've got one of our phase 2 places there. Yeah, so I grew up in Croydon. I now live in Sutton. So I've been London-based for most of my life. But just thought that's helpful context for you all. I'll share my screen. If someone could give me a bit of a wave, if it comes up. Brill. Okay. So I'm going to start with a bit of introduction on what the Pride in Place strategy is. And then where the Pride in Place programme sits within that, because it is part of a wider bit of work. So the strategy was announced in September, and there are sort of a few main parts to it, but it includes some legislative stuff, some sort of powers that have been given to local communities, but also a fairly large scale funding program, which is primarily what I'm here to talk to you guys about. So the strategy itself, as it says there, is about supporting communities, empowering them, and sort of giving them a bit more autonomy and say in their places. And that a lot of that will cover the entire country. So the legislation that will be going through and the powers that will be given out covers a much broader area than some of the other bits of the programme. The Pride in Place programme itself is what I work on and is the key funding pillar of the programme. As it says there, there's 20 million of support being provided to nearly 250 of the most in need places in the country. I can go through the methodology if you like, but essentially they've been selected through a mixture of deprivation and cohesion related metrics. And you can find it all online, and I can share the links a little bit later. But I'll come to that more in a sec in a little bit more detail. And then finally, you've got the Impact Fund, which is a short-term bit of funding that's more focused on community assets and will last a couple of years and then peter out once it's spent and once the sort of work's been done on that. But the programme itself that I'm working on is a 10-year commitment, so it's a little bit longer. So a little bit more on the programme itself. It's actually slightly different to some of the other programmes that government has run, and not just within this sort of parliament, but through previous years. And on the right-hand side, you've got some of those sort of differentiating factors. So I think the key thing to note is that it is a community-led programme, and we fed that into it through a few means. One is the decisions sit locally. So ultimately, we don't decide on how the money is spent at a local level. That is determined by local people. Their views are gathered through engagement that isn't standard. So it's not a consultation as you might have seen in some places. We really try and encourage work to get to the hard to reach groups, those that aren't usually part of the conversation, and then sustain that and really embed that in the decision making. And that's particularly true for the phase 2 places, for reasons I'll get onto in a little while. It's hyper local. So the phase 1 of the programme targeted what are typically known as towns, I'd say. So in my area, that includes places like Barnsley or Scarborough, Grimsby, that sort of size geography. But phase 2 of the programme is much more hyperlocal and is neighbourhoods, and probably a little bit smaller than what you'd recognise as parishes would be my guess, but it probably varies from place to place. Again, the selection for those is all online, but is that deprivation and social infrastructure point, as mentioned there. The third differential is that it's a long-term funding commitment. It's, I think, to my knowledge, the second longest commitment that the government makes to places. Often a lot of government programmes are maybe 3-4 years or even less than that. But this is a 10-year commitment. So places have the ability to plan, which is something that is often asked for. But also they have the ability to move the funding between the years. They don't have to feel rushed to spend it all in the first year. There is the ability to roll it over if that aligns with the community need and what projects they can fund in the area. And all of that money can go on a really long list of things. Our general line with places is if you can think of it, you can probably fund it. And there's a big long list published online of interventions and projects that places can fund without having to come back to us and seek permission. The only things that I can think of are maybe sort of things like defence or, I don't know, building a nuclear power station or something like that, because, well, one, the money wouldn't go that far, but two, your little neighbourhoods are probably not looking for that sort of thing, I'd hope. And then fourth is the sustainability. So this programme isn't just about the things that it funds. There'll be some really good projects funded, I'm absolutely sure of that. But it's more than just the outcomes from funding a project or a thing itself. It's about setting up a community infrastructure and supporting that so that it can do work beyond the remit of this programme, and can bring together other funding streams, other programmes, other institutions, and build a legacy that goes beyond the 10 years as well as beyond the programme initially. So that covers the headlines of the programme across what I've referenced as phase 1 and phase 2. I'll now touch a little bit onto what that difference means, because I think most of you are probably looking at the phase 2 places. So phase 1 places were announced 18 months to 2 years ago. They're on a slightly bigger geography, and they've done a lot more work, is the sort of the simple summary. So they've got boards established, they've got chairs of those boards, they've done engagement work, and they've submitted plans to us. And we're currently reviewing those plans at the moment. We expect sort of most of them to pass, and the delivery for those areas to really kick off in spring. I've just put a few sort of examples there of how it's gone down locally. But yeah, we're really encouraged by some of the stuff we're seeing, and we'll continue to work with them. And as I say, they are a bit further along in the process. For phase 2, things are slightly different. So the expansion was announced to 169 places in September. And so these are the places that a lot of you are resident in and work in and serve in. And then in December, we announced some sort of details about that, which we badged as a prospectus. And I'll share those links in the chat, and I'm sure they can be emailed around after. But what that did is essentially gave a set of guidelines for how places should work, what they should be doing, and how they can sort of work to deliver in their areas. So this has gone really well so far. We've been really pleased with the feedback to date. Places move at different speeds. Some have existing community infrastructure and are really pushing on and have, as you can see on the right there, they've already got chairs appointed. So that example only came through last week of a vicar in Gateshead that's been elected as the chair of the board. And I didn't include the comments section, but in amongst some sort of general scepticism from the public, which we're used to about most of our programmes, the response to Danny being put forward as the chair was immensely positive. So I don't know if anyone on the call is from Gateshead, but we were particularly encouraged by that response. The other picture I put at the bottom there is we were on Radio 4 over Christmas. I don't imagine many people were listening on the 28th of December, but it was a nice sort of plug for the programme. And then just another example of how well the programme's going down in a lot of places. So we're buoyed by it, let's say. In terms of next steps, what we're asking places to do, and largely through local authorities at the moment, is to just really raise awareness of the programme, to start reaching out into those communities, reaching out into the contacts that they have, identifying where they might have gaps for engagement, but to also start thinking about who could potentially chair these community boards, who could be members, who might be able to deliver some of the projects that could come out from that early engagement. And they'll be getting funding shortly. There'll be a sort of capacity style payment coming out relatively soon, which is to help that early engagement. But then they'll be able to do some sort of quick wins, as we call it, in the coming months, that just to help build momentum and belief in the programme, because we know a lot of these places are understandably sceptical about commitments made to them. So we want to show early that this is a commitment and it can yield results. And then looking further forward, we're hoping for those boards and chairs to be established around summer. We are in conversations about potentially confirming things sooner so places can get that certainty, but they will be looking to submit their long-term plans to us in November. And so that will include what they intend to spend it on in terms of themes of spend, where they intend to target it, and how they plan to deliver for their place over the next 10 years. I think I'll stop there because there might be some place-specific questions, but I think that gives you an overview of where the programme's got to, what we've achieved so far, but also how churches have got involved already. And that I should have said in phase 1 places, I think a couple of the chairs are from church background, and a lot of the boards have faith representatives from a whole host of different faith backgrounds. And it's sort of been particularly rewarding to see that, and seems to have gone really well. So yeah, I'll hand back to Rob, and we can work through questions later, I believe, and there's a bit of a discussion. But yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you very much indeed, Tom, for that presentation. And we'll make sure the slides as well get sent out to all of the members who are on all the people who have signed up for this particular webinar. Friends, before we go, if you could spend just a few moments now thinking about what sort of questions that you've got for Tom. Some of them, as he says, may be place specific, or perhaps more broad about the Pride in Place programme and the ways in which churches can be engaged. For transparency, just so people are aware, from a Church Urban Fund perspective, as you know, Church Urban Fund helps to oversee the Near Neighbours programme, and the Near Neighbours programme is something which has been heralded as best practice, good practice within the strategy for Pride in Place and a potential partner. So we are watching the work and listening to people's responses quite deeply in terms of the Pride in Place programme with a vested interest, particularly in terms of our Near Neighbours programme. And we'll come on to ways in which CUF can support you a little bit later on. As I say, keep those questions now going through the chat, and we'll keep an eye on them. It may also it makes me help sometimes to reflect in terms of, well, actually, why do churches get engaged with this work? And I don't know about you, but I've been quite struck as we've been reading through in morning prayer at the moment, particularly the Old Testament readings from the book of Genesis and the creation narrative, as we've been thinking about over the last few days in our morning prayer within the Church of England. And there's that sense in there in terms of God establishing and creating the world as God intends it to be, which actually means that any of these opportunities where there's investment in a local community, where the government and local communities are entering into a new form of partnership to help shape, this is about mission. This is about helping to shape the local community as God intended to be, and being aware of the different power dynamics and thinking, how might we, as the church, bring a sort of sense of hope and a sense of desire to want to draw out the skills and the gifts of everyone who's around, recognizing too that the extraordinary skills, and quite often in areas of deprivation because of the power dynamics, you'll be aware of this much more than I. Such skills are squashed, are quashed, and people are silenced in all sorts of different ways. And this, for me, gives us a wonderful opportunity as the church across the country in these areas of deprivation to recognize that actually the poor can be our teachers, and we can shape communities in the way that God intends them to be. One of the places I go to in relation to that is Jeremiah 29. And I just want to read out a little section of Jeremiah 29 before we then think of particular ways in which we can engage. And I'm wondering if our colleagues from Norfolk are here online to share something of the work which they're doing already in relation to Pride in Place. If you can keep that up your sleeve, and if you are aware, if you can let Polly and I know in the chat, that would be absolutely superb. This is what Jeremiah says in chapter 29 of the book. Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to all the exiles whom I have sent into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon: build houses and live in them, plant gardens and eat what they produce. Take wives and have sons and daughters. Take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there and do not decrease, but seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf. For in its welfare you will find your welfare. Friends, I'm aware that many of us do this work of building the welfare of the city, seeking the welfare of those beyond the church community. This is what we do, isn't it? This is the whole notion about what does it mean to serve, particularly in our parish churches, recognizing that at its very core, at its very root, the word parish means beyond the house, outside the house, serving those beyond those who attend on a Sunday morning. So, my friends, as we enter into a time now, just thinking about and responding to Tom Speed, we recognize that this is about God's business. This is about shaping communities as God intends them to be. This is following out that command, that desire of Jeremiah to seek the welfare of the city, not just our own welfare, because in the broader welfare, we will be blessed in abundance. And this, for you and I'm hugely aware, is just what we do. This is our business as usual. Can I ask now if there are any colleagues on the call, particularly from Norfolk, who are already engaged? Have you joined us this afternoon?
Yes,
If
we're
you
here, Rob.
Lovely, Vicky. We're in your safe and capable hands. Share us. What have you been up to in Norfolk? Tell us what you've been up to, Vicky, in Kings Lynn and beyond.
Thanks, Rob. So yeah, I'm Vicky. I'm the development worker for Together Norfolk in Kings Lynn. which is one of the CUF Associated Together networks. And my role has been to support churches across Kings Lynn and West Norfolk to collaborate well with one another, with local authorities, with VCSE partners, and with neighbourhoods for that long-term community well-being. And Kings Lynn is a town of around 45,000 people where inequalities are quite deep and locally concentrated. So several neighbourhoods are within sort of the 10% most deprived areas nationally, and child poverty rates are well above national average. And there's stark gaps in life expectancy between the most deprived areas and the more affluent ones, just a couple of miles away. So that's a little bit of the context of the Kings Lynn Pride in Place programme and what it's seeking to address. So as we know, we could be looking at the programme bringing in about 20 million of investment over 10 years. And our PIP board is seeking to commit a large percent of that on community development to ask how people, networks, neighbourhoods can be best resourced to make our neighbourhoods more resilient and more healthier. And as Tom said, particularly for that long term. And at the same time, we're really fortunate that particularly here in Kings Lynn, our council is also working with the Institute of Health Equity to enable the whole borough to become what's called a Marmot Place. And this is working really well alongside Pride in Place, because Marmot principles are about encouraging all partners, all stakeholders to tackle social determinants of health on a more relational, local, asset-based way, recognising that health is shaped by connection, trust and opportunity, and not just by delivering services. So in order for us as churches to make the most of the current appetite for investment in this kind of community development, as church representatives, we've been advocating a lot together at key moments and spaces with people who make decisions, both in Marmot and the Pride in Place, with the council, business leaders, community forums, articulating the role that churches already play and how central they can be in making this work functional, trusted, and particularly long-term. So here in our context, it's things like the historic work of Churches Together, who established the food bank, night shelter and debt centre. I'm sure there's lots of places that have a similar story, or more recently, some of the embedded community development work in one of our most deprived areas, North Lynn. We're really pleased that churches in Kings Lynn are increasingly being recognised as these key assets, offering trusted presence, buildings, volunteers, and that kind of deep local relationship. So I'm just going to pass over to Reverend John now, who is from the Beacon Church in North Lynn, who's going to share a little bit about what this looks like on the ground and how churches are engaging more practically with the Pride in Place programme across Kings Lynn.
Sure, so thanks. So as Vicky just alluded to, the churches in Kings Lynn have got a real rich history of engaging in their local neighbourhoods. There were 3 particular neighbourhoods that were identified in the Pride in Place plan as being places of deprivation that they wanted to elevate. The one that we're located in, North Lynn, is able to offer free community meals. It has toddler groups. It has a community cafe that operates. But going above that into our more town-wide church representation as well, there's other places. So each place that we're able to look at has got an example of other churches that are also doing things in those areas, such as Cornerstone Baptist Church in South Lynn has been able to provide free school meals during the holidays. Likewise, that happening up in Gaywood as well. Toddler groups being organised in both. So as Vicky just alluded to, we've had that long tradition of local things happening, being organised by the churches. So we have both the premises that are able to be used. We've got a culture, which is one of reconciliation, forgiveness, and a community that, as Bishop Rob was alluding to, is one in which we are welcoming and part of our communities and looking to benefit and bless them. And then thirdly, we've got the people power. So the social capital that we've acquired over many, many years of having lived in these communities, the Christians that are embedded there are able to offer a wide range of support. And so that kind of meant that when we were going forward, when we were having those conversations with our local town board, it was really promising to be able to kind of put forward a proposal and to be invited to make a proposal in delivering that, in delivering those projects, ones that we felt could be shown to demonstrate local decision making that Tom was just mentioning before, that it's not something that's a top-down model, but it's one that's arising from the grassroots on the ground. So as a result of that, we submitted just before Christmas a proposal for churches to assist in delivering that project in terms of the people power, the renovating of the neighbourhoods through revenue projects. The first one, we kind of put together a proposal that had a theory of change and suggested why churches are in the best position to be there. And that could kind of said, if we increased our capacity by having these extra things, such as community development workers located in each neighbourhood, that would sit alongside an asset-based community development model, which would then elevate those aspirations in those communities. And so we kind of explained what we needed and how much of a buy-in we required from the council in order for that to be executed. And we've also developed kind of part of that plan, just a structure, a basic understanding of how it would operate over the next 4 years. So that's where we're up to at the moment. We've submitted that draft proposal to the council that kind of explains how each neighbourhood would have community development workers in them so that those assets of the church buildings and the church people can be best utilised and capacity can be built upon it.
Thank you very much indeed, Jonathan and Vicky, for that really helpful insight about the practicalities on the ground in Kings Lynn of the relationships which are already beginning to be developed, utilising the Pride in Place and indeed other programmes as you've been sharing. Thank you for that. Friends, we're now in a time together of particular questions that you may want to share with Tom. And clearly there's a number of themes which are already arising from the questions which are there in the chat, Tom. And if I can just sort of try and decipher that a little bit for you to bunch them together, there's a clear questions which have arisen around power, and particularly around the roles of local authorities and who appoints the boards, how they're appointed in themselves, and particularly a question has been raised about the role of the chair, and are there particular job descriptions or role descriptions or whatever it might be to actually sort of shape that. Can you explain something of the process, the mechanisms which are there for these local neighbourhood boards, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first off, it's great to see sort of people being reached out to get involved in the boards and be chairs. That's encouraging. It shows us all the places are doing what they're telling us they're doing. In terms of a specific job description, so we have provided councils with a job description for the chair and the sort of thing that they would be responsible for and the sort of people it should be. But in our published guidance, of which the links will all be sent around, there is a governance section which sets out who should be on a board, who should be a chair, the sorts of things that we would expect to see. So you can find that on there as well. In terms of the selection for that, so at this stage, the local authority are our primary contact for this, in the absence of having anyone else as a contact point. So they are initially leading a lot of the work. They will be doing some of the early engagement and also serving as what we refer to as the accountable body. So essentially, they are accountable for things like subsidy rules and rules around procurement and the stuff like that. That's not the most exciting, but is sort of necessary as part of a program like this. But there is a view and a desire from a policy standpoint to move to more community-led delivery models, which may include things like community interest companies or trusts or limited liability companies. In Scotland, it might be a Scottish Community Incorporated Organisation, I think they're called, which may see the role of the local authority change a little bit. They might remain involved, but it's not something that we are wedded to in terms of the local authority's role remaining as it is. And that's same for the MP. The MP is a standard member of the board. They're required to be on the board and should be engaged in the programme. And we've had conversations with MPs around that. And again, as with any sort of local programme, they engage to different degrees and will work with the local authority in different ways. But they are, as I said earlier, a required member of the board and should be engaged on that. I think that's covered off sort of a bunch of questions around that sort of thing. There's a question around local authority board members. So officials aren't typically board members, but they do support. So for our phase one places, they're often the sort of secretariat function or something to that effect, particularly where boards are being established and don't have that existing sort of skill set themselves. But as I say, it's not something that we say is mandatory. the board could decide that they have the capacity to do that themselves. It's sort of locally determined, really. The other thing to say on boards and their appointment is we'll be doing a check in line with the rules that we've set out. So in July is the current deadline for boards to be submitted, and what we ask is that when they're submitted to us, there's a justification for why they are the way they are, and that they fit within the certain rules that we set out. And so what we'll be doing is we'll be reviewing that, and if we see glaring gaps, for example, there's no representatives in any way covering off sort of young people or certain communities within an area, then we'll query that and we'll question why that isn't the case. But that's often tailored to the place itself. If there are certain demographics that are more or less represented in an area in the resident population, then we'd expect them to be correspondingly included on the board.
Tom, there's a follow-up question about local authority officers sitting on boards come in. You might want to address that, and also a question around the timeline just above that in terms of when boards are appointed and then when the plans are required.
So in terms of specific questions about local issues, officers aren't on the boards. They might be contributing or non-voting members, but they are there to, as I say, support. I won't get into sort of local issues particularly. In terms of the time frame, we take a sort of approach that's dependent on the local area. So some places are wanting to confirm their boards, their boundaries and their chairs pretty shortly. Some might struggle within the timeframes that we've set out, and we're open to conversation around that, but we're trying to push for sort of delivery to start as soon as we can with it. The other thing to say, boards aren't set in stone, so you could get to a point where the board is compliant with our rules, and then in a year's time the board realises actually they don't have the expertise or representation from a group that's coming out as particularly in need of support, so they can bring someone else onto the board. And it's the same with chairs, that they can be changed over time. In terms of ensuring that there's representation, that's something that we encourage local authorities to do. And if you're involved in the conversations around the establishment of the board and you see a gap, all I can say is that you sort of advocate for that in that particular place. But as I say, it's something that we check as well. And if we're not content with it, then we voice that. And there are measures that we have around sort of providing funding or approving boards that we can deploy if we're not sort of satisfied by whatever's presented to us. In terms of the other point on timelines and things being quite quick, we don't ask, or we haven't asked for the 10 years to be fully planned out by November. So some of the submissions we had for the phase 1 places in the back end of last year, they might have confirmed projects for the first couple of years, and they've got an indication where they think spend will go for maybe year 3 and 4, but beyond that they haven't committed in any way, because they want to see how things develop, how things evolve, how groups engage. And so we try and give them the flexibility to adjust and make decisions over time. And if a particularly significant local need changes, then we're happy for plans to change as long as there's a reasonable justification for that, and it's not just we changed our minds and we've been incompetent or something along those lines. There was a question around maps. I've lost it in the chat now, but within the published guidance we've got a selection methodology document that has a list of all the places, and I'll also make sure that within the links that are sent around after, there's a tool, there's a sort of census map tool, which if you put in the specific name listed, it will give you a boundary map for the area. The boundaries of those are an ONS, the Office for National Statistics, determined boundary. So some of them can be a bit odd. So we are allowing boundaries to be adjusted by boards if they feel it doesn't fully represent what locally is understood as that community. And it's also permissible within the programme for funding to be spent slightly over the boundary or include people that live slightly outside of the remit. So we're quite tight that the funding is directed at the community, because that community has been selected for a reason, and that's because it's come out as amongst the most deprived and in need of support. But if a significant community asset sits just over the boundary, we're not going to say that that can't be part of the programme, which I think is sort of the gist of the question you're getting at. What else have we got? So in terms of, there's a question around the sort of funding composition a little bit. So the programme includes a mix of what we call revenue and capital funding. So that means that some of the spend can go on built infrastructure, is sort of the simplest way to describe capital, and some of it goes on things that are more day-to-day costs, like hiring staff or the ongoing funding of programmes to deliver. So there is a bit of a mix. Off the top of my head, I can't remember the exact split, but I think it's about a third revenue and 2/3 capital. But again, that's in the published guidance. And that can include costs for sort of secretariat functions and support staff and things like that as well. Holly, can you see if I've missed anything?
Yeah, there's a question about how do we engage our MP and get them to respond to our interest in partnering in these projects?
So the MP, as a sort of reference, they should be engaged in the programme. They've been invited to webinars and have been sort of sent information and documentation to engage in the programme. Some are running their own sort of consultations and engagement initiatives, and some of that's been delivered with the local authority. Some of it's sort of separate, and that's fine within the programme. Welcome to approach them directly. If that's sort of not yielding anything, then the local authority should be engaged in the programme. But failing that, I'm sure there's a way that you can get back to us. I think our email is on the guidance that I'll publish, and mine can be shared. So if you're having particular difficulties with a particular place and not hearing anything, then I can point you to the respective lead for that area and see what we can get sorted on that.
And there was a question about whether there's a framework for how projects should be presented.
I assume this is in relation to sort of projects that could be funded from the programme. So this is something that we sort of do let boards decide to a certain extent. What we look for when we assess plans is that there's a thread from robust and in-depth community engagement that's considered by the board, and then the projects that are selected are representative of the need that's identified in that area. So that could mean existing projects that are not especially well funded or need funding at the moment. It could be entirely new things that don't exist at all. There'll be all sorts of rules around ensuring that the sort of conflict of interest rules are adhered to, and things like procurement rules and legalities like that are met, and that's sort of where the local authority can support a little bit more. But yeah, we try not to be too prescriptive around exactly how and what is decided upon, as long as there's a sort of that robust thread from the community through to the final decision. Lydia, your question on phase 3 and phase 4, that's not something I'm able to comment on, but I guess the more effective that this programme is, the more likely further funding might be provided as such things. But yeah, we've already gone from phase 1 to phase 2, so our view is that the programme is being well received and people are looking at it as a good way of delivering.
And a couple of questions about the impact on charities that are currently running existing projects, and whether there will be also a conflict of interest on community boards which prevent local charities and organisations from benefiting from funding.
Yeah, really good question, that. So in terms of existing charities, I would be surprised if that doesn't come up, and I would almost hope that it did, because the programme is intending to have the people that are really involved in the community on the boards. Naturally, they're likely to be from organisations that are best placed to potentially deliver some of the programme. So that's not something that's unusual, and wouldn't be something we'd expect people to not get involved with because of. We ask that there are conflict of interest documents included with any submission that we receive, and that might mean that at a local level, for conversations relating to funding of a certain type, an individual is excluded from the vote for that project, for example. And that's the sort of thing we check through, that it's not just a coincidence that all of the funding is going to the 3 charities that are on the board, for example. But yeah, it's a fair question, but I wouldn't say it's something to exclude yourself from engaging in, because you think that it might mean that you don't get funding in future. In terms of charities that are already delivering stuff, they are within scope of receiving funding. The interventions list that's published as part of the documentation gives a pretty broad, long list. So if you're on that list, you are in theory eligible for funding. Paul, your question on the risk of sort of funding being pulled within the 10 years. It's a question we get semi-regularly. I think I can't comment on what's going to be happening within sort of the next 10 years in terms of government, but this is a programme that was originally planned, I think, 3 prime ministers ago now, and has been added to and expanded on over time. And through that, we've worked with MPs and councillors of all the 4, possibly even 5 largest political parties. So there is a real sort of support for this type of work across the political spectrum. The commitment that we've made and sort of memorandum of understandings that we'll sign with places are as much as you can get from a government commitment to the programme. So yes, in theory, that future political things can change the programme, but given how well the programme has gone down locally, the support that it's got across the political parties, I'd say that the chances are pretty good that it'll keep going for a little while. Kate, your question around the sort of the area, I will stick the link in the chat very quickly. The names of some of the areas selected are a bit odd. And that's partly because of how the ONS classifies areas of that level of geography. If you go onto the link that I've just put in the chat and then type the name of the place in the area section of that, you'll see the boundary. But as I said earlier, the boundaries can be adjusted as long as the board feels it's appropriate to do so. And projects that are slightly over the boundary can still be funded. They'll often sit in one parliamentary constituency, so they won't cross boundaries of that nature, and they'll often be in one local authority. I imagine there's probably not necessarily a link to parishes explicitly, because I think those are slightly different boundaries, but there might be historical boundaries that are shared, but it varies from place to place. Oh, Nick, good question. Yes, the undid data published last year. So the second phase of places were selected prior to sort of us getting access to that information. And so they were selected using the previous IMD statistics. Future programmes might vary slightly in their selection methodology. But what we're encouraging places to do is to look at the sort of the latest data and use that to inform where they decide to spend their money. But yeah, nice to see people hot on sort of data releases like that.
A question about including young people on the boards and whether that's possible, and also whether the project documents are available nationally or whether they vary from area to area.
So in terms of children and young people, the answer is yes. Boards have done it differently. So some boards might have direct representation from schools. So I've been at some where there's they might have the head boy or the head girl, or they might have someone from the school that wants to engage in the programme. They might have a head teacher or a teacher on the board. I went to Orchard Park in Hull, and I actually met with some primary school kids who were invited to the sort of kick-off meeting, which was quite novel. Some will have their areas sort of I forgot what the term is now, their junior MP, I think is the name, or someone from their sort of their junior parliament. So yes, they can be involved directly or indirectly, but that's something that we check quite a lot. And some places are really good at it, and some we have to nudge them a bit more.
And Vicky from Together Norfolk has commented that they've formed youth forums in each neighbourhood to work alongside the local community forums.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I think one place, I think it might be Eastbourne, set up a shadow youth board, which was formed of a representative from every school in the area. And I think the plan was they were going to be given all the same information that the adult board, but I just mean the main board, would get, and then they'd be asked what their view would be, what decisions they'd make. So I thought that was quite a novel way of approaching it. The question from yourself, Mark, about uncommon for councils to be nervous about giving churches money. This actually came up in the last call that I attended with Rob. It is something we've fed back, and I think it's a tricky one, and I don't think it's something that our minister would be. Well, I think our minister is supportive and has met with Rob previously and supported the work of organisations like this. So if that is happening, what I say is make us aware. I can't comment on sort of specific circumstances, but I know that some places have been nervous to engage with faith groups. So yeah, do let us know, and we'll see if we can intervene in a particular instance. But noted. Question on project documents nationally. So we do require that decisions and documents relating to board members and stuff for all the local places are published. They are often on the council's website, but maybe on sort of standalone websites that the boards have set up if they've chosen to do that. Some boards host public meetings. Some, well, all are required to publish the minutes and agendas and stuff like that. Some take questions. In terms of our documentation, it is all published online, and I'll make sure that those links are all sent around. But yeah, it varies locally how it's done, but we do require that it is done in every instance.
Tom, there's a question that's arisen from a number of people earlier up the chain as well from the chat, which is about the ongoing conversations about boundary changes around local authorities and the restructuring of the local authorities themselves. Any comments in terms of the implications of that upon the programme?
Yeah, so again, it's a question that we've had a few times, and it's nice to know that people are sort of paying attention to local government reform. Not everyone does. But what will happen there is as with a lot of things that existing local authorities deal with, any commitments that they've made will pass on to the subsequent authority. As I said earlier, we're looking into community-led delivery models, which would be a little bit more, or potentially be a little bit more separate to the local authority, so there might be less impact there. But we will keep working with whichever sort of local authority there is, and it isn't a case of a new authority would mean that the funding would stop or anything like that, which I think is probably a driving force behind some of the questions. If boundaries change or local authorities merge, that won't change where we are looking to invest the money. They are set.
Is there a way to? I'm conscious that this is one of my questions, if that's all right. I'm conscious too that we hear lots from local authorities about there being a lack of funding. How do local boards ensure that actually, if there's a deep commitment, if there's a deep partnership with the local authority isn't using it for its own, isn't using this investment for its own ends, and that actually it is deeply rooted in local decision making by local people for their local neighbourhoods?
Yeah, good question. And I can sort of answer in how we're looking at the plans that we've had submitted to us at the moment. So what we're looking for is we're looking at the projects that they're looking to fund. We're looking at the engagement that they've done and trying to see, is there a connection between the two? We're very conscious that in some places there might be a desire to fund things that the council had on their shopping list for a while, and they just divert the money to it, and it all feels very convenient. So we are conscious of that, and that's something that we're sort of quite hot on. We attend board meetings, we read through the minutes of sort of the meetings that we can't attend, and we're pretty engaged locally. So we hope that we can sort of spot where that's likely to happen. The boards themselves are the ultimate decision maker in all of this. And where we think that that's not fully being sort of executed, that's when we might get a little bit more involved. So I'm not sure, hopefully that reassures you to some extent. But yeah, it's something that we are aware of. There's a question on who makes the final decision on board. So the local authority in the first instance is responsible for bringing people together to be on the boards, alongside sort of the MP, particularly in the selection of the chair. There are some mandatory board members, so we ask for there to be representation from elected individuals, but they are explicitly not going to be the majority. Those will be submitted to us, and if we think that the board is not representative of the area, we won't approve that board to exist, basically. In terms of local processes, it does vary in terms of how people are engaged. If there are some groups or organisations or that already have a relationship with the council, then they're probably already having conversations. If you would like to be involved and are looking for sort of the local authority contact, I could suggest a quick Google to see if they've published anything about it from the council website. But if that doesn't yield anything in terms of sort of an offer for people to get involved, then do reach out to myself, and I'll try and forward you on to the right contact within the department that might be able to help out locally. In terms of, Jim, your question on, you don't have the people with expertise, but we do have a building to offer. So on the second point there, great. Community assets are sort of an important part of it. In terms of the expertise point, I wouldn't discount yourself from being involved. Part of the reason we provide the funding that we do in the way that we do is so that people that aren't usually involved in this sort of program are. And that will include expertise and training, and we offer that as well. And there's actually an event in a couple of weeks where we're inviting board members and chairs to come along. We try and encourage knowledge sharing between places, and we do a bit of it ourselves as well, just so that we can build that infrastructure locally that can then support the programme beyond the 10 years, but also within the 10 years itself, so it's not just the same people. In terms of how might the building help, well, one thing that I often encourage when I go to places is that when they meet, when they do engagement, they don't do it in the council building itself. They go out to the communities, they do it in the places where the people are, and they go and find the people directly rather than expecting them to come to them and sit in a sort of a council room and chat about something. We ask that they go to groups that already exist, that they don't try and reinvent things that are already there. So if there's a group that exists within a community setting that has connections into that already, draw upon that rather than trying to do it themselves fresh from the start.
Tom, thank you so much for diligently answering those various questions. I'm without doubt that further questions will arise in relation to this. And if you're happy for us to share your contact details and also the contact details for the wider Pride in Place team, then we will do that. And thank you for the invitation to respond to any further questions that people have got on this call. Thank you for your focus and your desire to want to make this whole piece of work really grassroots. I'm very aware the majority of people on this call are people who are working grassroots, and I'm sure that will be music to their ears in all sorts of different ways. And thank you for that sort of sense of vision which you bring to this conversation. Friends, just in terms of the role of CUF and the role of CUF support for your work and your grassroots work, I'm going to just share a piece of work. I hope everyone can see that. Just in terms of the offer that CUF brings. Do have a look at CUF's website. They've got all the details and things in terms of the programs and projects that we do operate. I just want to draw your attention. Many of you will be aware of this already, I'm aware, but we work particularly on a parochial basis. And so we have the lookup tool, which has got the up-to-date deprivation data for every parish across the Church of England. We've used the parish boundary data in terms of bringing this call together, where a member of our team, Sophie, has looked at the Pride in Place areas and looked at the parish data that we've got and brought them together to ensure that the parish clergy and those engaged in church leadership have been invited to this conversation today. So as well as the lookup tool we've got in terms of our mission work supporting churches, we have the knowledge resources, the knowledge bank, which is a number of resources there to help shape the work that we're doing, be it around volunteers, be it around funding, be it around the asset-based community development. There's a number of resources there on the knowledge bank, which is there on our website. We've spoken already here in terms of the Together Network being a partnership now of about 50 different organisations involving some dioceses. About 2/3 of the Church of England dioceses are members, and also some of the more founding members, and also some particular charities wanting to really work closely and collaboratively together to support grassroots community work, grassroots social enterprise work, as we've been describing. Many of you are engaged, I'm aware, in terms of our Places of Welcome network. It's very good to see Carrie on the call. Carrie oversees over 100 Places of Welcome in Lichfield Diocese. And it's also the resources around Growing Good are ones which between 600 and 700 churches now have been engaged with in using the Growing Good materials to help shape what does our response to the needs of our local community look like. Just to remind you then, friends, and the Near Neighbours programme, which I've mentioned already. Just to remind you then, friends, as we continue in this endeavour of developing and serving serving our local communities in order then to challenge some of the unjust structures of society as well with our advocacy work. CUF is here for you, and CUF wishes to support you in terms of the work, the important mission work that you're doing grassroots right across the country. If you have any particular questions for CUF, then please do get in contact with us. Our contact details are there on the website as well. And if I can strongly encourage each of you just to keep engaged with CUF's work, and we can do that, please, by just signing up for the newsletter. So if you click on the website, then click on sign up for the newsletter. You'll then be kept in regular update in terms of the developments of the work that Church Urban Fund is doing, as I say, existing to support the mission and ministry of churches in our areas, primarily of greatest deprivation, really celebrating and working deeply within the life of our communities, listening to our communities. Friends, it's been a really helpful hour. This meeting, this gathering webinar has been recorded. It will be shared with everyone who signed up to this conversation. There's nearly 150 people have signed up for this conversation. So that will be shared. And let's keep the conversation going, my friends. This is not going away. We've heard it's a 10-year commitment. And so it's an important opportunity for us to really help and shape the communities where God has called us to be. So finally, my friends, thank you for all that you're doing. A happy new year to each and every one of you. Thank you for the way in which you're helping to serve the community in bringing the good news of God's hope and God's love to the places where you've been called to serve. Thank you for your ministries. Thank you for your vision. Thank you for all that you are doing in the communities. And I look forward to seeing how these areas of partnership and collaboration develop with MHCLG, with CUF and beyond. But friends, it's been a good hour. Thank you very much indeed for being here, and we look forward to the conversation continuing. Many thanks. Take care and God bless.